You're sitting in a movie theater. 30 minutes in, the plot is weak, the acting worse, and your mind is drifting. You want to leave, but you don't. Why? Because you already paid for the ticket. This is the sunk cost fallacy, the subtle psychological trap that convinces us to keep investing in something just because we've already invested too much. Time, money, emotion, effort. Once we've given it, we feel we must keep going, even when continuing no longer serves us, even when it hurts. It's the voice that says, I've already spent 3 years on this degree, I can't quit now. I've been in this relationship for so long, I can't just walk away. I've poured thousands into this business. I have to make it work. We confuse what we've already given with what we still should give, and in doing so, we trap ourselves in a loop of diminishing returns. This fallacy emerges from a very human place, the desire to make our losses mean something. Letting go feels like failure. It means admitting the time, the energy, the resources were wasted, and we hate that feeling. So instead of cutting our losses, we dig deeper, like a gambler trying to win back what's gone, like a company funding a failing project, because we've already come this far, like a person staying in a draining friendship, because it's been 10 years, I owe it to them. The logic feels emotional, even noble, but it's a trap, because sunk costs by definition are irrecoverable. They're gone. No amount of persistence brings them back. Yet we let them weigh down our future decisions like invisible anchors, and this is where it becomes truly disturbing. We don't just waste money, we waste years, decades, sometimes entire lifetimes. In economics, this fallacy has been studied extensively, but in psychology, its roots run deeper. It ties to our identity, to the fear of regret, to the illusion of control. We want to believe we're rational agents, that our decisions are based on logic and benefit, but often, we're just trying to protect our past selves from shame. We double down on bad decisions because the pain of admitting we were wrong is harder to face than the cost of continuing. We'd rather suffer through what we started than face the discomfort of walking away. But what if that very act of walking away is actually the braver choice? What if true strength is not in finishing what no longer serves you, but in knowing when to release it? Take a moment to think about your own life. Is there something you're holding on to, not because it brings you joy or growth, but because you've already invested too much? Maybe a career path, a personal project, a commitment that's become a burden. Ask yourself, not what have I put into this, but what will I get if I continue? That question reframes everything, because the future is not obligated to validate your past, and clinging to sunk costs doesn't redeem them, it only multiplies them. Letting go is not waste, it's wisdom. It's the art of choosing now over nostalgia, freedom over obligation, reality over illusion. And when you begin to recognize the sunk cost fallacy in your thinking, you start to see it everywhere. In government policies that persist because we've already spent billions, in personal diets or fitness routines that don't work, but we stick with them because we already bought the plan. In tech companies clinging to outdated features because of how much went into development. The sunk cost fallacy is not just personal, it's systemic. And that makes this awareness even more powerful, because the moment you see it, you can step outside it, breathe, let go of the weight you no longer need to carry. The cost has already been paid. The only question now is, what do you want moving forward? Take a moment, feel the space that opens when you let go of something you were never obligated to keep. Imagine a dog in a cage. It's given a mild electric shock. At first, it jumps, scrambles, tries to escape, but there's no way out. It tries again the next time. Still no escape. Eventually, it stops trying altogether. It lies down, it accepts the shock. Even when the door is opened and freedom is just a step away, it doesn't move. This is learned helplessness, a deeply unsettling psychological condition, in which a person or animal, after repeated exposure to uncontrollable negative situations, stops trying to escape. Even when escape is possible, they learn, incorrectly, that they are powerless, and that belief becomes more powerful than the actual conditions around them. The original experiments were conducted by psychologist Martin Seligman in the 1960s. He wasn't trying to discover helplessness, he stumbled into it. Seligman was studying classical conditioning, but what he found was darker. Dogs who had experienced inescapable pain stopped resisting, even when the pain could now be avoided. They had learned that nothing they did mattered, and that belief stuck. Now imagine that same principle in human form. A student who constantly fails despite effort may stop studying altogether. A person in an abusive relationship may stop trying to leave, believing there's no point. Someone working a dead-end job, drowning in debt, may begin to see life as something that just happens to them, not something they can change. This is the mental prison of learned helplessness. It rewires the brain to anticipate failure, rejection, or suffering, no matter what. It disconnects action from consequence, and when that happens, motivation collapses, hope dissolves. But perhaps the most disturbing part is that this helplessness is often invisible. People may appear lazy, passive, or indifferent on the outside, but underneath, they've internalized a message: trying doesn't matter. And once someone believes that, really believes it, even the most obvious escape route can go unseen. It's not that they can't move forward, it's that they no longer believe they can. Take a moment and think about your own life. Are there places where you've stopped trying, not because there's no way out, but because some part of you has already decided escape is impossible? Learned helplessness doesn't shout, it whispers. It tells you to give up before you've begun. It convinces you that effort is wasted. It turns one failure into a narrative. This is just how things are. But here's the paradox. Learned helplessness is itself learned, and that means it can be unlearned. The same studies that uncovered this condition also found a way out, through small wins, tiny successes that slowly reconnect action with outcome. When the dogs in Seligman's later experiments were gently guided out of the shock zone, physically helped to move, their behavior began to change. They started trying again, because they saw that movement mattered. In humans, therapy techniques like cognitive behavioral therapy often work the same way, not by overwhelming the person with positivity, but by helping them take one meaningful step, then another. Hope, like helplessness, builds through experience. But there's another, deeper dimension here. Society often reinforces learned helplessness without realizing it. Systems that punish effort disproportionately, cycles of poverty, discrimination, or trauma that teach generations that the world is hostile and unchangeable. Even subtle daily experiences, being ignored, dismissed, invalidated, can nudge someone into this mindset over time. Learned helplessness isn't just a personal failing, it's a reflection of systems that reward silence and punish resistance. And once enough people fall into it, it becomes cultural. A community that stops voting because they believe it doesn't matter. A generation that stops dreaming because the system feels rigged. A workforce that clocks in and out, but no longer sees the point. That is the true cost of helplessness, not just individual suffering, but the collective shrinking of possibility. So what can we do? We begin with awareness. When we name this pattern, we loosen its grip. We stop seeing inaction as laziness, and begin to see it as a scar, a symptom of past futility. And then we move, slowly, gently, toward relearning, by reclaiming the connection between effort and outcome, by celebrating small wins, by reminding ourselves, and others, that even the smallest action is a rebellion against despair, because the lie of learned helplessness is you are powerless. But the truth is far more beautiful, and far more dangerous. You are not. Take a moment to sit with that, to feel where in your life that belief may have taken root, and then with compassion, not force, ask yourself, what is one small thing I could try again? Even if it doesn't succeed, the act of trying is its own kind of freedom. Have you ever picked up your phone without thinking, opened an app, scrolled, refreshed, before even knowing what you were looking for? You weren't bored, you weren't curious, you were trained. Welcome to behavioral conditioning you never noticed, a psychological force shaping your decisions every day, in ways so subtle, you mistake them for free will. The term conditioning brings to mind Pavlov's dogs. You've likely heard the story: a bell rings, and the dog salivates, because it's come to associate the sound with food. Simple, direct, almost innocent. But what happens when that bell is a notification, or a like, or a red dot on your screen, or an algorithm deciding what you see, and when? Conditioning didn't stop with Pavlov's dogs. It just got better dressed, smoother, smarter, invisible. It's in the apps you use, the music you hear, the layout of supermarkets, the design of social media timelines. Operant conditioning, first studied by psychologist B.F. Skinner, teaches that behavior can be shaped through rewards and punishments. If a behavior is followed by something desirable, you're more likely to repeat it. If it leads to discomfort, you're more likely to avoid it. Seems logical, until you realize it's being applied constantly to you. You post a photo, you get likes, dopamine fires. You open a news app, it shows you something outraging, you engage more, you swipe, and occasionally find something amazing, just enough to keep you swiping. This is variable reinforcement. the most addictive kind. Skinner found that when rewards are unpredictable, like a slot machine, you engage even more, because your brain learns, maybe this time, I'll win. It's not malicious by design, but it is effective, and when you zoom out, you see that your digital environment has trained you, over years, into patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior. It tells you when to feel pleasure, when to feel outrage, when to check, scroll, reply, consume, not with harsh commands, but with subtle cues, tiny feedback loops that make you feel like you're choosing, but what you're really doing is responding. And this goes far beyond technology. Think about how you were conditioned as a child. Did praise come when you obeyed, or when you questioned? Did love feel tied to achievement, or to authenticity? Many of us were conditioned not just into habits, but into identities. Be good, don't rock the boat, do what's expected. These weren't commands, they were reinforced, through approval, attention, belonging. So we learned to perform, to stay in line, to avoid discomfort, even if it meant betraying our own curiosity. We're told we're free, but most of our daily actions are just responses to conditioning we never realized we received. And here's where it gets eerie. Once you see this pattern, you begin to question, what else have I been trained to do? Do I crave productivity, because I was taught that rest equals laziness? Do I fear saying no, because I was rewarded for being agreeable? Do I reach for my phone in moments of stillness, because silence feels like withdrawal? You start to realize that many of your habits, maybe even your preferences, aren't entirely your own. They were planted, reinforced, rewarded. But here's the key. Conditioning can be unlearned, or rather, retrained. It begins with awareness. When you feel a craving, pause. Ask yourself, am I choosing this, or responding to a cue I didn't place? When you find yourself seeking a reaction, likes, praise, applause, ask, whose approval am I conditioned to need? Even the smallest acts of awareness are powerful disruptions. They interrupt the loop, they restore choice, and gradually, you begin to reclaim your autonomy. The world is filled with conditioning. That's not a flaw, it's part of how we learn. But when it happens in the shadows, when we mistake reinforcement for truth, we lose something vital. The space to decide who we are, instead of who we've been trained to be. So take a moment, feel your breath, step out of the loop. You are not a dog salivating at a bell. You are a conscious being, waking up inside your own patterns. And now that you've noticed them, you can begin to change them. Let that awareness soften into the background. Let it drift. You walk into a room and smell fresh citrus. Suddenly you feel the urge to clean. You don't know why. You read a story about an elderly person. Minutes later, you unconsciously walk a little slower down the hallway. You sip from a warm cup of tea while speaking to someone new. And afterward, you describe them as kind, warm, even though you barely know them. You didn't decide these reactions. They simply happened. This is priming, a psychological effect so subtle, you rarely know it's happening. But so powerful, it shapes how you think, feel, judge, and act every single day. Priming is the phenomenon where exposure to one stimulus influences how you respond to a later, seemingly unrelated one. It happens quietly, automatically. Your subconscious is always listening, even when you think you're in control. In one of the most well-known experiments on priming, researchers asked participants to solve word puzzles. Some were filled with neutral words. Others were sprinkled with words like old, retired, Florida, wrinkle. The task had nothing to do with age. But after finishing, participants who'd read the elderly associated words walked more slowly when leaving the room. They weren't told to think about old age. They didn't consciously choose to change their pace. Their minds were gently nudged, and their bodies followed. It doesn't stop there. When people are shown the image of a briefcase, they become more competitive. When they see a backpack, they become more cooperative. Subtle cues, profound shifts. Your environment is constantly priming your subconscious with tiny suggestions, hints that shape your emotions, your decisions, your reactions. The music in a grocery store can make you move slower and spend more. The scent in a hotel lobby can make you rate the service more highly. The color of a button can influence whether you click buy now or keep scrolling. But priming isn't just about manipulation. It also reveals something fundamental and unnerving about the human mind. That we are not as rational as we think. That our choices are not formed in some pure isolated space. They are primed by sounds, images, ideas, smells, even memories just below the surface of awareness. Take a moment to reflect on today. What did you see? What did you hear? What phrases were repeated in your media feed? What colors surrounded you? What ads slid by in the background? Each of these may have whispered something to your subconscious, and those whispers shape your reality. This is what makes priming so eerie. It bypasses your awareness. It doesn't ask for permission. It's just you. It's not mind control. It's more subtle than that. It's mental suggestion, and like a well-placed seed, it often grows unnoticed. In politics, news outlets use language designed to prime emotions, words like surge, flood, crisis, even when describing neutral events. In marketing, scarcity phrases like only a few left or selling fast prime urgency and fear. In social media, seeing others perform idealized versions of their lives primes comparison, even self-doubt. You think you're just scrolling, but your mind is absorbing and changing. It's not all negative. Priming can be used to uplift too. Reading words associated with kindness makes people more generous. Being exposed to imagery of nature can reduce stress. Even the simple act of smiling, genuinely or not, can make you feel slightly happier, thanks to a feedback loop between body and mind. The real question is, can we defend against priming? Not entirely, because to do that would mean controlling every sound, word and symbol in your environment. But awareness changes the game. When you know your subconscious is being whispered to, you begin to pause, to ask, is this choice mine, or has something nudged me toward it? You become less reactive, more reflective. This doesn't mean rejecting every impulse or doubting every emotion. It means noticing the unseen hands that shape them, because we are not machines with perfect logic. We are stories, layered with memories, meanings and quiet cues that run deeper than we realize. So as you sit here, in stillness, as your breath slows and your thoughts soften, consider what your day has primed you to feel. Are you being pulled in a direction you didn't choose, or are you returning to center, clearing space from the clutter of suggestion? Take a moment to be aware, to remember that your subconscious is always listening, but so are you. Imagine waking up in a world where the rules have shifted, where your clothes are taken, your name replaced with a number, and your freedom reduced to a single word: obey. Now imagine, it's not real. It's an experiment. And yet, you still change. Your voice lowers. Your posture collapses. You begin to forget who you were. This is the chilling power at the heart of the Zimbardo Prison Experiment, one of the most controversial psychological studies ever conducted. A study that didn't just observe behavior, it transformed it. In 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo set out to explore the psychology of imprisonment. He wanted to understand how social roles, guard and prisoner, could shape identity, morality, and power. He recruited 24 healthy, intelligent male college students. No history of violence, no mental health issues, just ordinary people. They were randomly assigned to be either guards or prisoners in a mock prison set up in the basement of Stanford University's psychology department. The simulation was meant to last 2 weeks. It ended in 6 days. What unfolded was not just unsettling, it was a mirror held up to the darkest parts of human nature. On day 1, things were calm. By day 2, the prisoners rebelled. And by day 3, the guards began to change. They enforced rules with increasing aggression. They created psychological punishments, forcing prisoners to clean toilets with their bare hands, perform repetitive exercises, or remain in solitary confinement for hours. They stripped prisoners of their individuality, and they started to enjoy it. These were not trained officers. These were college kids, becoming cruel. And the prisoners? They broke down, emotionally, physically. Some became passive, withdrawing entirely. Others grew paranoid, confused, helpless. One prisoner had such a severe psychological breakdown, he had to be released early. Zimbardo, who acted as the prison superintendent, didn't intervene right away. He was too immersed in the simulation himself. It wasn't until an outside observer, his then-girlfriend Christina Maslach, walked in and was horrified by what she saw, that the study was stopped. 6 days, that's how long it took for average, everyday people to become something else entirely, when given power without oversight, and stripped of accountability. The Zimbardo experiment wasn't just about prisons, it was about roles, and how easily we surrender our morality to them. We like to think of evil as something out there, a rare trait found in monsters, but this experiment whispered a darker truth. Evil can emerge from ordinary people, placed in extraordinary circumstances. The guards weren't told to be cruel, they were simply told to maintain order, but vague instructions in a system with no limits. That's a recipe for abuse. It shows us how authority, when unchecked, can twist behavior, how uniforms, rules, and titles can override conscience, and how quickly empathy collapses under the weight of perceived control. The prisoners, too, reveal something profound. Their suffering was real. Their submission was real. Even though they could technically quit at any time, many didn't. Why? Because the mind, when surrounded by power and stripped of agency, adapts. They weren't just pretending to be prisoners, they were becoming them. And perhaps that's the most disturbing part. This wasn't a movie. There were no scripts. The roles emerged naturally, and if it happened to them, who's to say it couldn't happen to us? Think about the systems you live in, workplaces, institutions, governments, social hierarchies. Where do the roles you play, manager, student, employee, follower, begin to shape how you treat others? How often do we follow orders because it's just how things work? How often do we look the other way because stepping out of line feels dangerous? The Zimbardo experiment doesn't offer easy answers. In fact, it raises uncomfortable questions. Where does responsibility lie? With the individual, the system? What does it take to resist dehumanization when it's normalized? And perhaps most chilling of all, if you were randomly assigned to that mock prison, would you have been one of the cruel guards, or one of the broken prisoners? Take a moment to sit with that, not to judge, but to observe, because self-awareness is the first step out of the roles we didn't choose. The Zimbardo Prison Experiment was shut down, but the systems that inspired it still exist, in institutions, in hierarchies, in cultures where silence keeps cruelty in place. Understanding this study isn't about pointing fingers, it's about recognizing how thin the line is between the person you think you are and the one you could become, and how awareness, reflection, and moral courage are what keep us human. It starts as a whisper, a notification, a scroll, a friend posting photos from a concert you didn't attend, a product labeled only 2 left in stock, an opportunity slipping through your fingers before you even knew it existed, and suddenly, that whisper grows louder. You feel it in your chest, a subtle restlessness, a pressure to act, a fear that you've missed something you shouldn't have. This is FOMO, the fear of missing out. And it's not just a passing emotion. It's a deeply engineered, psychologically exploited vulnerability that has become one of the most powerful tools of manipulation in the modern world. FOMO isn't new. It's ancient. We're social creatures, wired to care about status, belonging, and access. Thousands of years ago, missing out meant being left behind by your tribe, missing a hunt, a migration, a chance to survive. Your brain evolved to pay attention to what others are doing, especially when you're not included. But in today's world, this wiring is weaponized. Social media doesn't just show you your friends' lives, it curates them, amplifies them, presents the best moments, the vacations, the parties, the success stories, while hiding the mess in between. You're not just missing a thing, you're missing everything, all the time. And marketers know this. Ever seen a timer ticking down on a website? Flash sale ends in 3 minutes, or a product page that says, 12 people are viewing this right now. It's not information, it's a trigger, because the moment you believe something is scarce, your rational mind takes a back seat. You're not thinking, do I need this? You're thinking, what if I regret not getting it? FOMO hijacks the part of your brain responsible for long-term thinking. It makes you act on impulse. It says, better to buy now and regret later than miss it forever. And the dark genius of it, you often don't even want what you're chasing. You're chasing relief. Relief from that uncomfortable feeling of exclusion. This isn't just about money or time, it's about identity, because FOMO tells you that your worth is linked to your participation, your presence, your ability to keep up. If you're not watching the show everyone is talking about, if you're not on the app where the trends begin, if you're not joining the movement, the drop, the conversation, you're no longer relevant. But here's the paradox. The more you chase inclusion, the more you feel excluded, because there's always something you're not doing, something you're not seeing, and the faster you run, the more you fall behind. This is no accident. FOMO has been engineered into every corner of digital life. The infinite scroll, the disappearing stories, the real-time feeds, the artificial urgency. You're not choosing what to consume, you're reacting to what might vanish if you don't. And that state of constant reactivity leaves you mentally exhausted, emotionally scattered, spiritually numb. Take a moment. When was the last time you sat still, truly still, without checking your phone, without glancing at what others are doing. Have you noticed how hard that has become? It's not just habit, it's design. But here's the truth, FOMO doesn't want you to realize, missing out is inevitable. You're always missing out on something. That's life. What matters is what you're present for. Presence isn't passive, it's a radical act of choosing what you give your attention to. FOMO says, you might be left out, but mindfulness says, you're already here. So how do we resist FOMO's manipulation? Start by recognizing when it's happening. If you feel urgency, pause. Ask, do I want this, or do I just not want to miss it? If something feels artificially scarce, step back. Real value is not created through pressure, it's revealed over time. And if your self-worth feels tied to your participation, remind yourself, you are not defined by what you consume, or how fast you respond, or how much you post. You are defined by what you choose to be present for. The deepest connections, the most meaningful insights, the quiet truths of life. They don't come with a countdown clock. They arrive in stillness, in silence, in the moments you weren't chasing something else. Let yourself miss out. Let the world go on without you sometimes. Not everything needs to be seen, shared, or seized. In a culture of urgency, intentional absence is power. So breathe, close your eyes, and remember, you are not behind. You are not late. You are not missing anything you truly need. Imagine this. You're taken hostage. Your life is in someone else's hands. They decide when you eat, when you sleep, whether you live or die. You should feel fear, hatred, rage. But instead, you begin to feel something else. A strange empathy, a flicker of understanding. You start to rationalize their behavior. You even begin to protect them, defend them. To the outside world, it looks like madness. But to you, it feels like survival. This is the haunting paradox of Stockholm Syndrome, a psychological phenomenon where captives form emotional bonds with their captors, sometimes even falling in love with them. It defies logic, but it's real, and perhaps more common than we think. The term Stockholm Syndrome was born in 1973, after a bizarre 6-day bank robbery in Sweden. 2 armed men held 4 hostages inside a vault, but when the standoff ended, something strange happened. The hostages refused to testify against their captors. One of them even raised money for their defense. Another later got engaged to one of the robbers. It was baffling. A psychologist named Nils Bejerot coined the term Stockholm Syndrome to describe this apparent reversal of roles. Victims siding with perpetrators, trust replacing fear. But what causes it? At its core, Stockholm Syndrome isn't about affection. It's about trauma and survival. When a person is trapped in a terrifying situation with no escape, their mind adapts. The captor becomes the gatekeeper of pain and of relief. So even the smallest acts of kindness, a glass of water, a softer tone, feel amplified. A moment of not suffering becomes confused with care. The captive's brain rewires. Fear becomes gratitude. Hatred becomes attachment. And suddenly, the lines blur. This is not weakness. It's not stupidity. It's a deeply human coping mechanism. The psyche clings to any illusion of safety, even if that safety comes from the one causing the danger. But here's the chilling twist. Stockholm Syndrome doesn't just happen in hostage situations, it happens in abusive relationships, in toxic workplaces, in oppressive systems, anywhere there is power imbalance and psychological confinement. A partner who controls your world, then gives just enough affection to keep you hoping. A boss who berates you, then praises you just enough to keep you loyal. A system that strips your agency, then tells you it's for your own good. You defend them, you explain their behavior, you say things like, they didn't mean it, they're under a lot of stress. It's not always like this. You tell yourself the small moments of kindness cancel out the cruelty, but they don't. They never did. And yet, this is how the mind survives. Because when you're trapped, believing there's a reason for the pain feels safer than believing there's none. Rationalization becomes a form of protection. The paradox deepens when you realize that feeling empathy for your captor can actually reduce your perceived level of threat, and that, ironically, can make survival more likely. So it's not insanity, it's a twisted kind of emotional intelligence. But the cost is your clarity. You lose track of what's real, what's love, what's control. You begin to think that loyalty is virtue, even when it's built on suffering. Take a moment. Think about areas in your life where you've justified mistreatment, not just from people, but from beliefs, institutions, ideologies. Have you ever defended something that caused you pain because it gave you occasional relief? That's Stockholm Syndrome in disguise. It thrives in silence, in isolation, in systems that reward loyalty to the very forces that keep you small. And yet, once named, it begins to lose power, because the mind only clings to illusion when it believes there is no other way. Once you know the pattern, you can begin to break it. You can ask harder questions. Why am I loyal to this? What do I believe they're giving me? What do I lose by walking away? Stockholm Syndrome isn't just a cautionary tale about hostages and criminals, it's a mirror, one that shows us how trauma bonds form, how fear can masquerade as affection, and how power when abused can rewrite our deepest sense of self. So be gentle with yourself. If you've ever clung to someone, or something that hurt you, you weren't weak, you were adapting. But adaptation is not destiny, and recognizing the trap is the first step to escaping it. Picture this. A child sits quietly in the corner of a classroom, drawing vivid, imaginary creatures. No one asked her to. She just loves it. The way the colors swirl, the way the stories in her head come to life. She does it for joy, for herself, for no reason at all. Now imagine her teacher notices this, and says, "If you keep drawing every day, I'll give you a gold star." She smiles. The stars feel good. They become a reward, a recognition. But something subtle starts to shift. She begins to draw not for joy, but for approval. For stars, for something external. And then one day, the stars stop coming. And so does the drawing. This is the overjustification effect, a psychological phenomenon, where external rewards actually undermine our internal motivation. It's counterintuitive. We assume that rewards, money, praise, prizes, will motivate people to do more of what we want. But in certain cases, they do the opposite. They strip an activity of its intrinsic value and replace it with a transactional feeling. In the 1970s, psychologists Edward Deci and Richard Ryan conducted an experiment that would become a landmark in motivational psychology. They asked college students to work on a puzzle. Some were paid, others were not. The students who were paid worked diligently, while being observed. But when left alone, no one watching, no money offered, they stopped. The unpaid students, they kept working, just for the satisfaction of solving it. In that moment, the puzzle had meaning. It was themselves they were engaging, not a paycheck. When people are rewarded for doing something they already enjoy, the brain begins to associate that activity with the reward, rather than the joy of doing it. And once that reward is removed, the motivation vanishes. This has profound implications, not just in classrooms or labs, but in our everyday lives. Think of a writer who once wrote stories late into the night, just for the pleasure of it. Then comes a contract, a deadline, a paycheck. Slowly the love gets tangled in pressure, deadlines start to crush wonder, the joy fades. Or a child who loves helping around the house, until they're given money for chores. Suddenly, helping isn't an act of care, it's a job, and if there's no money, no help. It's not that rewards are bad, they can be powerful motivators. But they change the why, and often the why is everything. The overjustification effect reminds us that humans are not simple input-output machines. We crave meaning, we crave autonomy, we crave the quiet thrill of doing something just because it feels right, because it matters to us. When that internal spark is replaced by an external incentive, something sacred is lost. We become performers, not participants. Now think bigger. What happens when society runs entirely on external validation? Grades, likes, salaries, followers, status. When every action is tracked, rated, monetized. Where does intrinsic motivation go? What happens to art that no longer comes from joy, but from algorithms? What happens to kindness that's only offered for praise? The overjustification effect doesn't just show up in studies, it lives in our culture. It whispers, don't do it unless it pays. Don't help unless someone's watching. Don't create unless it gets clicks. But the truth is, some of the most meaningful things we do are the ones we do in silence, when no one is watching. When no reward is expected. That's where the soul lives. So, how do we guard against this effect? First, we become aware of it. We ask ourselves, why am I doing this? What would I do if no one ever found out? What brings me joy even when there's no applause? Second, we give ourselves permission to create, explore, or help, without attaching a reward to the outcome. because sometimes the act is enough. And third, when offering rewards to others or ourselves, we remember to reward the process, not just the result. Instead of "you got an A, here's a prize," we say, "I saw how hard you worked, that persistence is inspiring." Instead of "you made a sale, here's a bonus," we say, "the way you treated that customer, with empathy and patience that matters." By doing so, we reinforce the internal compass, not just the scoreboard. So take a moment, think about something you used to love, but somehow lost interest in. Is it possible that the joy was buried under expectation, that a passion became a performance? If so, you're not broken. You're human. And it's never too late to return to the core, to rediscover what you do simply because it feels good, because it reflects you. The Overjustification Effect is a gentle warning. Protect your passions, guard your joy, don't let the world trade it for stars or coins or likes, because the best parts of us are often the parts we give freely. You're lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. The shadows seem to form a face. You blink, it's gone. But for a second, it felt real. You've just experienced a taste of apophenia, the human tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random noise. It's the psychological mechanism that makes us see shapes in clouds, hear voices in white noise, or feel like a stranger on the train was meant to appear at that moment. At its most innocent, apophenia is what turns the night sky into constellations. It helps children find dragons in clouds. It's the engine of creativity, metaphor, and imagination. But under the surface, there's something darker, because sometimes this need to find patterns, this craving for meaning, leads us into dangerous illusions. Coined by psychiatrist Klaus Conrad in the 1950s, apophenia originally described the early stages of schizophrenia, when patients began to see connections and conspiracies everywhere. But in truth, this trait isn't limited to any disorder. It's universal. We all see patterns that aren't there. Our brains are pattern recognition machines. They evolved to find signals in noise, even when none exist. Because in the wild, seeing a predator in the bushes, even if it's just wind, was safer than missing a real threat. Better to be wrong 100 times than dead once. But in the modern world, this survival strategy has gone rogue. Today, we don't just see faces in the dark, we see meaning in coincidence. We read messages into dreams, we connect unrelated events and feel destiny unfolding. We believe the song that played when we were sad was sent to us. We stitch chaos into story, because story feels safe, and when apophenia meets fear, it births conspiracy. It whispers that the news is fake, that the world is secretly controlled, that nothing is random. The human mind abhors randomness. It's unsettling, threatening, empty. So we fill the void with patterns, even false ones. Apophenia also explains why we often believe we've discovered hidden truths. It gives rise to gambling addictions. When a lucky streak feels like a signal, it fuels pseudoscience. When two unrelated things are said to correlate, it shows up in data overfitting, where researchers find patterns in meaningless noise and think they've made a breakthrough. In all of these, the illusion is the same. I see something others don't. That feeling is intoxicating. It makes us feel chosen, special, awake. But it's a trap, because once we believe a pattern is real, our minds work overtime to confirm it. We remember the hits, forget the misses. We become blind to randomness, and suspicious of anything that contradicts our new vision. Apophenia is the seed. Confirmation bias is the soil, and together they grow into belief systems that feel unshakable, even when they're built on air. But here's the twist. Apophenia isn't always wrong. Sometimes real patterns are hidden in the noise. Great scientists, artists and thinkers have followed strange hunches that turned out to be true. Einstein once said, "The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art, and all science." So how do we tell the difference? How do we know when we're uncovering hidden truths, and when we're simply drawing faces in the dark? The answer lies in skeptical curiosity. It's okay to see patterns, it's okay to be curious, but we must hold those insights loosely, test them, question them, invite contradiction, because when we cling too tightly to the meaning we create, we stop seeing clearly. We trade awareness for certainty, wonder for paranoia. Apophenia is not evil, it's not a flaw, it's a feature of the human brain. It's what allows us to dream, to invent, to make sense of chaos. But left unchecked, it can become a maze with no exit, one where every shadow becomes a symbol, every coincidence a message, and every silence a warning. So take a moment, think about the last time something felt too perfect to be random, a repeating number, a sign, a coincidence that felt like fate. Were you seeing a truth the world was trying to tell you, or were you painting stars in a sky of static? The truth is, both can be beautiful, as long as we remember, not every pattern is a prophecy, not every echo has a source, not every feeling is a fact. Imagine walking into a room of strangers. You casually mention your opinion on a social issue, maybe something you believe most people would agree with. But the room goes silent. Faces tighten. Someone gently pushes back, and suddenly, you realize, you were assuming everyone thought like you. This quiet assumption that others share your beliefs, values, or preferences is called the false consensus effect. It's the psychological illusion that our thoughts are more common than they really are. It happens when we believe that our opinions are not just reasonable, but normal. That others, if they're rational, would naturally see things the way we do. And when they don't, we're surprised, confused, even threatened. The false consensus effect was first studied in the 1970s by social psychologists Lee Ross, David Green, and Andrew House. They gave participants a moral dilemma, something ambiguous, and asked them to choose how they would respond. After answering, participants were asked two things. What would most other people choose? What kind of person would make the opposite choice? Across the board, people believed that others would make the same choice they did, and those who wouldn't. They were labeled as biased, flawed, or misinformed. In other words, we not only assume consensus, we judge those who break it. But why do we fall into this trap? Because our perception of the world is shaped by proximity. We're surrounded by people like us, family, friends, social media bubbles, cultural norms, so our ideas get reinforced, echoed, normalized. And slowly, we begin to believe, this is what most people think. This is how the world works. This is the truth. But often, it's not. And the moment we step outside that bubble, the illusion cracks. This bias is subtle, but it shapes nearly everything. Politics, religion, morality, even personal habits and tastes. If you love pineapple on pizza, you might assume most people do. If you're vegetarian, you may believe it's the obvious moral choice. If you're deeply skeptical of government, you might think everyone should be. And when someone disagrees, it can feel unsettling, as if reality itself is shifting beneath your feet. The false consensus effect has consequences far beyond casual opinion. In politics, it fuels polarization. Each side thinks it holds the majority view, convinced the other side is fringe, irrational, or extreme. In leadership, it leads to flawed decisions when managers assume their team is aligned without actually checking. In relationships, it causes tension when people misread their partner's needs or boundaries. And in society, it erodes empathy, because when you believe everyone thinks like you stop trying to understand those who don't. You stop asking questions, you start making assumptions, and assumptions are the death of connection. Now here's the twist. We don't just overestimate agreement from others, we underestimate how different minds can be, different life experiences, different definitions of normal, different fears, values, and dreams. In that way, the false consensus effect isn't just a cognitive bias, it's an empathy trap. But what happens when we begin to question it? When we realize that our normal isn't universal, something shifts. We become more curious, more open, more willing to ask instead of assume. And that small shift can change everything. It invites better conversations, wiser decisions, deeper understanding. Because suddenly, disagreement isn't threatening, it's informative. It tells you something about the world beyond your filters, and it brings you closer to the truth. So take a moment, think of a belief you hold strongly, something you feel confident others should agree with. Now ask yourself, do I know this to be true, or do I just assume it is? Who have you never asked? Who have you never really listened to? The false consensus effect is a gentle bias, but its roots run deep. It speaks to the part of us that wants to feel secure, that wants to be part of something bigger, that fears being alone in our perspective. But growth comes from stepping into that discomfort, from realizing that the world is far more diverse than we imagine, and that's not a threat. It's a gift. We don't need everyone to agree with us. We just need to be awake enough to notice when they don't, and humble enough to ask why. Have you ever met someone who spoke with such certainty, such boldness, about a topic they clearly didn't understand? Or maybe you've been that person, confident at first, until you learned just enough to realize how much you didn't know. This is the quiet, humbling paradox of the Dunning-Kruger effect, a cognitive bias in which people with low ability in a given domain overestimate their competence, while those with high ability tend to underestimate it. In simple terms, the less you know, the more you think you know, and the more you actually know, the more you realize how little you understand. The effect was first named by psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger in 1999. After reading a story about a man who robbed a bank with lemon juice on his face, thinking it would make him invisible to security cameras, they were struck by the idea, if someone is incompetent, how would they even know it? They began testing this in studies asking participants to rate their abilities in grammar, logic, or humor. The results were consistent. The worst performers consistently rated themselves above average, not because they were lying, but because they lacked the metacognition, the ability to see their own gaps. Ironically, the very skills needed to evaluate one's performance are the same skills required to perform well. This is the trap. When you're just beginning in a subject, everything looks simple. You see a few moving parts and assume you understand the machine. This is the peak of Mount Stupid, where confidence is high, but competence is low. Then comes the fall. You learn more. You realize how vast the topic is, how many exceptions, complexities, contradictions exist. Suddenly, your confidence drops. This is called the Valley of Despair. You know enough to be aware of your ignorance, but not enough to feel skilled. But if you keep learning, slowly, patiently, you begin to climb again. Not back to blind confidence, but to informed humility. This is the slope of enlightenment, a place where true experts live. They know how much they don't know. They speak with care, with caution, with a quiet kind of certainty, and often, they're the ones we ignore, because in a noisy world, confidence sells, not accuracy, not thoughtfulness, just certainty. That's what draws us in. The Dunning-Kruger trap isn't just an individual bias, it's a societal one. We reward boldness over nuance, quick takes over deep thought, loud voices over thoughtful silence. And so, the people most unsure of their own knowledge often become the most influential. Meanwhile, those who actually understand the topic are lost in hesitation, self-doubt, and complexity. Now think about how this shows up in daily life. The co-worker who insists they're an expert after one podcast. The politician who claims to know more than the scientists. The friend who offers unsolicited advice on your mental health, nutrition, or parenting, with no background at all. But also think about yourself. Have you ever spoken too soon, taught too confidently, dismissed an expert because their answer didn't feel satisfying? It's easy to laugh at the man with lemon juice on his face. Harder to admit we've all worn invisible ink at some point. The Dunning-Kruger effect is not an insult. It's not a diagnosis. It's a mirror. It shows us that confidence should not be the currency of truth, that humility is not weakness, it's wisdom, and that the most dangerous thing is not ignorance, but ignorance of ignorance. So what's the way forward? First, learn to say, I don't know. It's one of the most powerful, honest phrases we have. It opens the door to learning. It shows strength, not failure. Second, seek complexity. When an answer feels too simple, too clean, too certain, pause, look deeper. Real knowledge often lives in the gray areas. Third, separate confidence from credibility. Just because someone speaks with force doesn't mean they're right. Ask, do they understand the opposing view? Can they admit uncertainty? Do they adjust their position when shown new information? If not, you may be listening to someone at the top of Mount Stupid. Finally, remember, we're all susceptible to this trap. It doesn't mean you're foolish, it means you're human. We all begin by knowing nothing. And at every stage there's more to learn, so take a moment to reflect. Where in your life might you be more certain than you should be? And where might you be wiser than you give yourself credit for? The Dunning-Kruger trap teaches us that the path to wisdom is not paved with answers, but with better questions, and that true intelligence begins with doubt. You're in a conversation. Someone says something you know is wrong. You gently correct them, offer the facts, maybe even a study or two. You expect curiosity, maybe reconsideration, but instead, they double down. They become more confident, more defensive, more certain that they were right all along. You showed them the truth, but instead of changing their mind, it backfired. This is the backfire effect, a psychological phenomenon, where being presented with contradictory evidence only strengthens someone's original belief. It sounds impossible, doesn't it? We like to believe we're rational, that evidence sways opinion, that truth, when revealed clearly, wins, but the mind doesn't always work that way. especially when beliefs are tied to identity. The backfire effect was popularized in 2010 by Brendan Nahan and Jason Reifler, political scientists who studied how people respond to corrections of misinformation. They found something strange. When participants were shown factual corrections to a political claim they believed, many didn't soften. They strengthened their position. In other words, truth made them dig in deeper. Why? Because beliefs aren't just information, they're psychological territory. When someone challenges your belief, it feels like they're challenging you, and the brain reacts accordingly. Neurologically, it activates the same threat response system as physical danger. Your heart rate increases, your fight or flight system turns on, and instead of absorbing the new information, your brain goes to war. Cognitive dissonance, remember that from earlier, it kicks in hard, and to reduce the discomfort, your mind rewrites the story. I'm not wrong, they are. This data must be biased, this is just manipulation, and suddenly, the facts don't matter, because the belief is being protected, not examined. This isn't just about politics, it shows up everywhere. Vaccines, climate change, nutrition, even sports and fandom. Any topic where belief is emotional, where it's tied to group identity or worldview, is vulnerable to the backfire effect. And here's where it gets even more unsettling. You're not immune to it. Even now, your brain has hidden places it defends, ideas it holds so tightly that any challenge feels personal. We all have them. Blind spots, convictions, stories about the world, and about ourselves. And when those stories are threatened, the truth feels like an attack. This is why debates often don't work, why arguments escalate, why showing someone the right evidence can make everything worse. We're not really arguing about facts, we're protecting ourselves. Now consider what this means in a society flooded with information. When misinformation spreads, and corrections are ignored, or worse, rejected, how do we build shared truth? The backfire effect reveals a disturbing answer: we might not. In some cases, facts alone aren't enough, because before a mind can change, it has to feel safe. Safe to be wrong, safe to not know, safe to update, and in most arguments, that safety is the first thing we destroy. So what's the way forward? Not through louder facts, not through more aggression, but through curiosity. Instead of confronting belief, explore it. Instead of saying, "You're wrong," ask, "What led you to that conclusion?" People open up when they feel heard, not when they feel cornered. And within yourself, watch for the same pattern. That defensive heat when someone challenges you, that tightening in the chest, that desire to reject, dismiss, deflect. That's the signal, that's the doorway, that's where real thought begins. Because the backfire effect is not just about others, it's about you, me, all of us. It's a reminder that truth is not always welcome, that the mind doesn't seek accuracy, it seeks coherence. And sometimes, coherence requires rejecting reality. So take a moment, think of a belief you hold deeply, something you feel sure about. Now imagine hearing convincing evidence against it. How would you respond? Would you open, or resist? The backfire effect doesn't mean we can't change. It means that change requires trust. Trust in the source, trust in the process, and most importantly, trust in yourself. The belief that you can be wrong, and still be worthy. You spill coffee on your shirt before work. You trip walking up the stairs. You mispronounce a word during a meeting. You feel the heat rise in your face. You're sure everyone noticed. But they didn't. In fact, most of them didn't even see it. And those who did, they forgot minutes later. This is the quiet illusion of the spotlight effect, the psychological phenomenon where we believe we're being noticed far more than we actually are. It feels real, doesn't it? That invisible pressure, that awareness of being seen, judged, watched. But in truth, most people are too wrapped in their own internal spotlight to pay attention to yours. The term was coined by psychologists Thomas Gilovich, Victoria Medvec, and Kenneth Savitsky in 2000. They ran a study where participants were asked to wear an embarrassing t-shirt, one with a large picture of Barry Manilow, and then enter a room of strangers. Afterward, the participants were asked to estimate how many people noticed their shirt. They guessed nearly half. But in reality, only about a quarter of the observers could even recall what the shirt was. This simple experiment revealed something profound. We are not the center of everyone's universe, but we often live as though we are. The spotlight effect is rooted in a basic truth of human psychology. We experience life from a first-person perspective. Our thoughts, our feelings, our actions, they're vivid to us. And so we project that vividness outward. We assume others are just as focused on us as we are on ourselves. But they aren't. Everyone around you is busy managing their own insecurities, their own self-image, their own inner voice. This illusion doesn't just affect social blunders, it colors everything, from public speaking, to wearing a bold outfit, to asking someone out, to speaking your mind. The fear of judgment becomes a barrier. It stops us from trying, from showing up, from being seen as we truly are. But here's the paradox. The spotlight effect tells you that people are watching you more than they are. Yet in reality, you're often invisible in the exact moments you fear exposure. And in those moments of self-consciousness, when you're sure everyone is staring, you're trapped in a spotlight that only you can see. Take a moment to reflect. Think about a time you felt embarrassed in public, a stumble, a bad joke, a misstep. You probably remember it in detail, what you were wearing, who was there, how it felt. But now ask yourself, do you remember anyone else's small mistakes with that same clarity? Probably not, because most people don't. They forget. They move on. And so would you, if it wasn't your mistake. The spotlight effect also creates social anxiety. It convinces us that any misstep will define us, that others are forming lasting opinions based on moments we can't forget. But in reality, people are far more forgiving, and far more forgetful, than our brains would have us believe. This illusion can also work in reverse. When we do something kind or brave or meaningful, we underestimate how much it matters, because we're still trapped in that self-focused spotlight. We assume our efforts barely register in others' minds, but sometimes, they do. Sometimes, the thing you did casually, the compliment, the invitation, the help offered, became a small light in someone else's day. The spotlight effect, then, doesn't just distort your fears, it distorts your impact. And understanding this can be freeing, because if people aren't watching you as closely as you think, you can move more freely, speak more openly, fail more courageously. It's not that your actions don't matter. They do, but they don't matter in the way your anxious brain imagines. You are not being judged nearly as often as you feel, you are not being watched nearly as closely as you fear, and you are not being remembered nearly as intensely as you worry. And once you let go of the illusion, you create space to try things, to risk looking foolish, to live a little louder. The next time you feel that hot wave of self-consciousness, pause, breathe. Remind yourself the spotlight isn't real, everyone else is under their own. So step off your imaginary stage, walk freely through the crowd, and remember, while you're worried about how they see you, they're busy worrying about how you see them. There's a train barreling down the tracks. Ahead, 5 people are tied to the rails. You're standing next to a lever. If you pull it, the trolley will switch tracks. But there's one person tied to that side too. Do you pull the lever? This is the trolley problem, a deceptively simple moral puzzle that has echoed through philosophy classrooms, ethics boards, and even artificial intelligence labs. At first, it seems straightforward. 5 lives versus 1, a basic calculation. Save the many, sacrifice the few. But morality rarely lives in math. Now consider a second version. You're on a bridge above the tracks. There's no lever, but standing next to you is a large man. If you push him, his body will stop the train, killing him, saving the 5. The outcome is the same. 1 dies so 5 may live. But suddenly, the answer feels different. Why? Because this isn't about logic, it's about psychology. When you pull a lever, you feel removed, like a technician flipping a switch. But when you push a person to their death, you become the agent of violence. The act becomes personal, emotional, visceral, and this is the heart of the trolley problem. It isn't really a question of right or wrong, it's a mirror reflecting how we feel about moral choices. It reveals the strange, often contradictory ways our brains weigh intention, proximity, and consequence. At its core, the trolley problem confronts 2 ethical frameworks: utilitarianism, which says the right action is the one that maximizes overall good, and deontology, which says some actions are always wrong, regardless of outcome. A utilitarian says, pull the lever, fewer people die. A deontologist might say, don't interfere. Killing, even for a good reason, is still killing. So, who's right? The discomfort lies in the fact that both answers feel wrong, and both feel right. Now add complexity. What if the 1 person on the track is a child, and the 5 are terminally ill? What if the 1 is your partner, and the 5 are strangers? What if you know that choosing nothing means you indirectly caused 5 deaths, but choosing something means you directly caused 1? Suddenly, every certainty begins to unravel. The trolley problem is not meant to give you a clean answer. It's meant to expose how unstable our moral reasoning can be. It shows us how easily ethics can be swayed by framing, by emotional distance, by subtle shifts in detail. And in the modern world, these questions are no longer hypothetical. Self-driving cars, for example, must be programmed to make trolley-like decisions. If a crash is unavoidable, should the car prioritize the life of the driver or the pedestrian? Who decides? The programmer, the manufacturer, you? The trolley problem also echoes in war, medicine, climate policy. Who gets resources? Whose lives are valued? Who is considered sacrificable? These aren't abstract questions, they're being answered every day, quietly, invisibly, by systems and people you'll never meet. But perhaps the most unsettling lesson is this: your moral decisions are not as consistent as you think. Studies show that people change their answers based on how the problem is worded, who the people are, even what time of day it is. We like to imagine ourselves as ethical beings, calm, rational, grounded in principle. But the trolley problem whispers a deeper truth. We are creatures of context, of feeling, of instinct dressed in reasoning. So take a moment, think about how you make decisions, not just in theory, but in life. Do you avoid responsibility when it feels too direct? Do you justify harm when the outcome seems worth it? Are your ethics shaped more by logic, or by fear of guilt? The trolley problem doesn't have a solution, but maybe that's the point. It's not a question we answer, it's a question that answers us. It shows us who we are beneath our principles, the invisible levers we all pull, the people we save, and the people we quietly push. Imagine waking up each morning feeling a little more uncertain. You forget where you put your keys, but someone insists you never had them. You mention a conversation from last night, but they say it never happened. You begin to question yourself, your memory, your sanity. This isn't just forgetfulness or coincidence. It's something darker. This is gaslighting, a psychological manipulation so subtle, so insidious, that you don't even notice it's happening, until you're no longer sure what's real. The term comes from a 1944 film called Gaslight, where a husband slowly convinces his wife that she's losing her mind. He dims the gaslights in their home. She notices. He tells her she's imagining things. He hides objects, denies conversations, dismisses her instincts, and over time, she believes him. Gaslighting doesn't attack the body, it attacks reality. It replaces your certainty with doubt, eroding your trust in yourself, piece by piece. It begins subtly. A partner says, "You're too sensitive." A boss says, "You must have misunderstood." A friend insists, "You're remembering it wrong." At first these comments seem harmless, even reasonable, but repeated over time they carry a powerful implication. You can't trust your perception, and once you lose that trust, you become vulnerable. Gaslighting isn't always malicious. Sometimes it's a defense mechanism. Sometimes it's ignorance. But when it's deliberate, it's a form of psychological control, one that forces you to rely on someone else's version of reality. And in a way that's the ultimate power. Not control over your actions, but control over your truth. This isn't limited to personal relationships. Entire systems can gaslight populations, governments, media, corporations. They can manufacture narratives, deny facts, and reshape collective memory. You're told something didn't happen, despite photographic evidence. You're told a crisis is under control, despite lived experience. You're told to doubt your own senses. This is manufactured reality, a large-scale version of gaslighting, where shared truth is deliberately manipulated. And once enough people accept the altered version, it becomes real, not because it's true, but because it's repeated. Propaganda thrives on this. So do disinformation campaigns. If you repeat a lie often enough, with enough authority, and discredit every opposing voice, eventually the lie settles in, not as belief, but as assumption. And that's the terrifying part. Gaslighting doesn't need you to believe it fully, it just needs you to stop resisting, to stop trusting your instincts, to start second-guessing yourself. You don't have to surrender to a false narrative, you just have to stop questioning it. But gaslighting doesn't always wear the mask of manipulation. Sometimes it masquerades as kindness. "Don't worry, I'll remember for you. I only said that to protect you. You're overthinking it." And yet, the effect is the same. You feel smaller, less certain, less real. So how do we defend ourselves? Awareness is the first weapon. Knowing the signs, chronic denial, distortion, contradiction, and isolation, can help you spot the pattern. But more importantly, you must re-anchor your own sense of reality. Keep a journal. Document events, emotions, timelines. Not for anyone else, but for you. Because when your world is being rewritten from the outside, written evidence becomes your compass. Also, pay attention to your body. Gaslighting often creates a disconnect between mind and intuition. If your body tenses when someone speaks, listen to that. It might know something your mind is still trying to ignore. And perhaps most critically, trust your discomfort. Gaslighting often works because it uses your politeness, your empathy, your willingness to doubt yourself as weapons. But discomfort is not a flaw. It's a signal. Now, step back with me. Ask yourself, have there been moments in your life, relationships, institutions, conversations, where you began to question your own memory? Not because it was wrong, but because someone else told you it was. What happens when we give that power away? Gaslighting isn't just about lies, it's about ownership, of reality, of identity, of truth. And in an age of algorithmic feeds, deep fakes, misinformation, and curated perception, this phenomenon has moved far beyond personal abuse. Entire cultures now experience collective gaslighting, where truth is constantly shifting, facts are weaponized, and objectivity dissolves into narrative. We now live in a time where reality is not just debated, it's manufactured. And that brings us to a critical insight. Your perception of reality is fragile. It can be distorted, bent, broken, but it can also be rebuilt. Not with certainty, not with arrogance, but with careful observation, with grounding, with courage, and above all, with the knowledge that your experience, your memory, your voice, matter, even when someone tries to convince you otherwise. It's late at night. A woman screams for help in the street below. Windows light up. Curtains shift, eyes peer through glass, but no one calls the police. No one goes outside, no one does anything. You'd like to believe you would, you'd help. You're not one of those people. But psychology says something quietly unsettling. The more people who witness a crisis, the less likely any one of them is to act. This is the paradox of the bystander effect, a psychological phenomenon where individuals are less likely to offer help to a victim when other people are present. It seems backward, doesn't it? Shouldn't more people mean more chances for someone to help? But instead, the opposite often happens. Responsibility diffuses across the crowd, and what belongs to everyone feels like it belongs to no one. The idea gained widespread attention after a real tragedy. In 1964, Kitty Genovese was murdered outside her apartment in Queens, New York. Early news reports claimed 38 witnesses saw or heard the attack and did nothing. Later investigations revealed that the story wasn't so black and white. Some did try to help, some called the police. But the myth endured, and it sparked deep research into human inaction. In one landmark study, researchers staged emergencies like someone fainting in a controlled environment. When participants were alone, they rushed to help, but when they were in groups, the response slowed or disappeared entirely. So what's happening here? There are a few forces at play. First is diffusion of responsibility. When you're alone, the choice is yours, act or not. But in a group, your sense of duty dilutes. You think, someone else will do something. Second is social proof. We look to others to decide how to behave, especially in uncertain situations. If no one else is panicking, we assume there's no reason to panic. So everyone stays still, waiting, watching, each person misinterpreting the other's inaction as a sign that everything's fine. It's a psychological loop, everyone waiting for someone else to lead. And third is evaluation apprehension. We don't want to look foolish. We fear helping too soon, too dramatically, too incorrectly, so we hesitate. And in those moments of hesitation, opportunity vanishes. The bystander effect isn't just about emergencies. It shows up in subtle ways. Every day, you see a colleague being mistreated, but say nothing. You notice someone in distress on the subway and avert your gaze. You scroll past a plea for help online, because surely others will respond. It's not that you're cold-hearted, it's that you're human. Your brain, your instincts, your social wiring, they all conspire to keep you passive, unless something snaps you out of it. But here's the twist. The bystander effect can be broken. In studies, when just one person takes action, others often follow. When responsibility becomes visible and specific, you call 911, you check on them, people respond, the fog lifts, the group becomes human again. You don't need to be a hero, you just need to be first. There's a quiet power in that. Not loud, not flashy, just decisive. But why is this important? Because the bystander effect doesn't just explain our silence in moments of crisis, it reveals how fragile our sense of responsibility truly is. It shows us how easily action becomes someone else's job, and that realization can be deeply uncomfortable. You like to think of yourself as moral, compassionate, brave, but in a crowd, in the right moment, when fear and uncertainty rise, you might freeze, you might look away, and unless you understand why, you won't know how to change it. So take a moment now, reflect on a time you didn't speak up, didn't intervene, not because you didn't care, but because it just felt easier not to. That moment wasn't a failure of character, it was a failure of awareness, but awareness can be cultivated, and next time, maybe you'll be the one who moves first, the one who breaks the spell, because it only takes one. Picture this. A man sits in a quiet lab, electrodes monitor his brain. On a screen in front of him, a single word appears. Key, but it's flashed only to the left side of his vision. He stares blankly, says he didn't see anything. Then the researcher asks him to reach under a curtain and feel around for an object. Without hesitation, his left hand grabs a key. He still insists he didn't see anything, and in a way he's telling the truth. Welcome to the strange world of split-brain patients, a world that forces us to ask one of the most unsettling questions in neuroscience. What if your mind is not one thing, but two? Most of us think of ourselves as a unified consciousness, a single eye navigating the world. But the brain isn't a single organ, it's a system, a network of parts that communicate constantly, sometimes with astonishing independence. At the center of this communication is the corpus callosum, a thick band of nerve fibers that connects the left and right hemispheres of the brain. In the 1960s, to treat severe epilepsy, surgeons began severing the corpus callosum in a procedure called a corpus callosotomy. It worked. The seizures often stopped. But something else happened. Something strange. When patients were tested afterward, they seemed completely normal, until researchers began conducting split visual field experiments. Here's how it works. Because of how the brain is wired, images presented to the right visual field are processed by the left hemisphere, and images to the left visual field by the right hemisphere. In people with an intact brain, information flows across the corpus callosum, so both hemispheres share what they see. But in split-brain patients, that bridge is gone. The hemispheres are now cut off from each other, so when a word appears in the left visual field, processed by the right hemisphere, and the left hemisphere, where language usually resides, doesn't get the message. The person can't say what they saw, but that doesn't mean the right brain didn't understand it. Give the left hand controlled by the right brain a task like choosing an object by touch, and it performs perfectly. It's as if there are two minds in one skull, one verbal, one silent, one that knows and speaks, and one that knows but cannot speak. This opens a chilling philosophical door. If two hemispheres can act independently, which one is you? Are you your left hemisphere, the one that speaks and reasons, or are you also your right hemisphere, feeling and perceiving in ways you can't consciously express? It gets even stranger. In some studies, split-brain patients are shown two images, one in each visual field, a snow scene in the left field, a chicken claw in the right. They're asked to pick related objects from a row of pictures. The right-hand left hemisphere chooses a chicken, the left-hand right hemisphere chooses a shovel. The patient is then asked, why did you pick the shovel? And here's the twist. The speaking left brain, unaware of what the right brain saw, doesn't say I don't know. Instead it invents a reason. Oh, the chicken claw goes with a chicken, and you need a shovel to clean out the coop. It's a confabulation, a narrative stitched together on the spot. And it reveals something profound and unsettling about human consciousness. We are not truth-tellers by default. We are meaning makers. Even when one part of the brain has no idea why something happened, it prefers to explain rather than admit ignorance. Think about that. What else in your life, your preferences, your beliefs, your choices, might be stories your brain is inventing to keep the illusion of unity alive? We often think of consciousness as a spotlight, a singular beam illuminating experience. But split-brain research suggests it's more like a committee, a fragile alliance of cognitive modules, each with its own domain, sometimes working together, and sometimes not. And if you remove the bridge between those modules, you don't get silence, you get independent minds, quietly working in parallel. It's tempting to ask, would the two hemispheres develop distinct personalities over time? Would one become dominant? Would they argue? We don't fully know. But what we do know is that the idea of a single indivisible self might be just that. An idea, a convenience, a useful illusion, one that keeps us sane but not necessarily accurate. Take a moment. Consider the possibility that you, the voice in your head, the sense of identity you hold, might be just one thread in a deeper tapestry of minds, woven together by anatomy and habit. And that deep within you, there may be thoughts, feelings, intentions, that belong to a part of you that doesn't speak, but still acts. The mystery of the split brain is not just about surgery or neuroscience. It's about the architecture of consciousness itself. What if the self isn't a thing, but a collaboration? And what happens when that collaboration breaks? As we leave behind the quiet duality of the split brain, we turn to another haunting question. What if we're not even in control of our own beliefs? A group of teenagers loiter outside a convenience store, laughing loudly, their phones glowing like fireflies in the dusk. To some, it's harmless, just kids being kids, but to others, it feels ominous. A sign of societal decay, the beginning of something darker. Maybe you've felt it, an unease at a trend, a subculture, a behavior that seems unfamiliar, and therefore dangerous. That unease isn't always rooted in facts, but in a psychological phenomenon as old as civilization itself. It's called a moral panic, a collective surge of fear, emotional, contagious, and often irrational, sparked by the belief that a certain group, behavior, or trend threatens the moral fabric of society. It begins quietly, a disturbing news story, a viral video, an expert's warning, but soon it snowballs. Concern turns into outrage. News cycles amplify it. Politicians promise to fix it. Parents panic. Laws change. The threat may be real, or it may be exaggerated, but perception, not reality, drives the storm. The term moral panic was popularized by sociologist Stanley Cohen in the 1970s. He studied the reaction to clashes between two British youth subcultures, mods and rockers. What began as isolated scuffles on the beach exploded into national hysteria. Headlines screamed of rising violence. New laws were passed, but the actual events were minor. It wasn't the event itself. It was what society believed the event symbolized. That's the heart of a moral panic. Not just fear, but the fear that something you value, order, innocence, tradition, is being eroded. And it's a pattern that repeats. In the 1980s and 90s, it was satanic cults. Daycares were accused of ritual abuse, despite no physical evidence. Careers were destroyed, lives derailed. The panic spread like wildfire, fueled not by proof, but by suggestion. Then came violent video games, comic books, rock music, hip-hop, TikTok, artificial intelligence. Each generation finds its own villain, and each time, the fear is dressed as morality. But underneath it all is something deeper, anxiety about change. When society shifts, when norms evolve, people look for something to blame, something simple, tangible, symbolic, a scapegoat that can carry the weight of their discomfort. Because it's easier to say, this new thing is dangerous, than to say, the world is changing, and I don't understand it. And here's the eerie part. Moral panics feel true because they're emotional. They resonate. They play on primal fears of children being harmed, of values being lost, of chaos replacing order. Once that emotional response is triggered, logic often takes a back seat. We confuse outrage for insight. We mistake volume for validity, and the panic spreads, not through reasoned debate, but through repetition, imagery, and appeals to protect what's good. There's usually a clear villain, a group that becomes the target. Teenagers, immigrants, artists, scientists, queer communities, subcultures, any group seen as other. The media plays a key role. Sensational headlines, out-of-context quotes, dramatic music behind interviews. These aren't just stories, they're scripts, written to provoke. Because fear is profitable, fear gets clicks, fear sells, but moral panics have a cost. Real people get hurt. Policy gets shaped by emotion, rather than evidence. Entire communities are stigmatized. Creativity is stifled. Progress is delayed. And when the dust settles, when the facts finally emerge, we often look back and ask, how did we fall for that? But the answer is always the same. We weren't thinking, we were feeling. So how can we recognize a moral panic in real time? Here are a few clues. The threat is vague, but emotionally charged. The targets are often marginalized or misunderstood groups. The response is disproportionate to the evidence. The narrative frames it as a battle between good and evil. There's a call to protect the children, society, or our way of life. If you see those patterns, pause. Ask yourself, who benefits from this fear? What's the actual data? Is this about harm or control? Because moral panics aren't just about morality, they're about power. When people feel powerless, economically, socially, culturally, they often turn to moral certainty. They find something to condemn, something to rally against. It feels righteous. It feels good, but it can be deeply misleading. And here's the most chilling part. You don't need to be an extremist to fall for a moral panic. You just need to be human, vulnerable to fear, drawn to simplicity, wired for emotional resonance. It's not weakness, it's psychology, but awareness is power. Take a moment. Think about something you've been told is dangerous, something new, something unfamiliar. Ask yourself, do you fear it because of what it is, or because of how it's been framed? Is the threat real, or is it emotionally constructed? No judgment, just inquiry. That's how we resist the pull, because the greatest defense against moral panic isn't outrage, it's curiosity. You're watching the evening news. The top story, a plane crash. No survivors. You weren't on that flight. You don't know anyone who was, but still, your heart skips. Something in you recoils. Later that night, you're asked to choose how you'll travel for your next trip. Without much hesitation you think, maybe driving is safer. Statistically it's not, but emotionally, it feels that way. Why? Because the plane crash was vivid, recent, shocking. It didn't just happen, it happened in your mind. It created an impression, and that impression became your reality. This is the availability heuristic, a subtle mental shortcut your brain takes, using what comes easily to mind as a stand-in for what's likely or true. If something is more memorable, more emotionally charged, or more recent, you're more likely to believe it's common, or likely to happen again, even if the actual probability is low. It's not logic that drives the heuristic, it's mental availability. If it's easier to recall, it feels more real. Our brains evolved to make quick decisions with limited information. In the wild, this was often a life-saving ability. If you saw one tribe member eaten by a lion, you didn't need to do statistical modeling, you just avoided that part of the forest. But in the modern world, where we're constantly bombarded by emotionally charged information, this shortcut can distort our understanding in profound ways. You hear about a shark attack, and suddenly the ocean seems dangerous. You watch a true crime documentary, and suddenly your neighborhood feels less safe. You read about lottery winners, and suddenly buying a ticket feels less like hope, and more like odds. This is the trap of availability. The ease with which something comes to mind is not evidence of how likely it is, only of how memorable it is. And the media plays directly into this. News cycles are driven by what is shocking, rare, or emotionally intense. Those are the stories that draw attention. But when we consume them, we often mistake frequency of coverage for frequency of occurrence. It's not that the world is more dangerous, it's that our awareness of danger has increased. This heuristic doesn't only affect how we perceive risk, it also shapes how we view people, politics, even ourselves. Consider stereotypes. If the only stories you've heard about a group of people involve crime or failure, your mind will retrieve those examples first, not because they're representative, but because they're available. Vividness becomes truth, and truth becomes bias, or think of self-perception. If the most memorable experiences you've had are failures, criticisms, embarrassments, then those are what your mind recalls when you think about yourself. Even if you've had more successes than failures, your brain doesn't count. They just weren't as emotionally sticky. The availability heuristic builds a world around you, but it's not the real world, it's a highlight reel, a collection of emotionally charged fragments, playing over and over. And if you're not careful, you'll confuse those fragments for facts. So how do we defend against it? First, by slowing down. The heuristic is fast, intuitive, it thrives in snap judgments. But if you pause, if you take a breath, you can ask yourself, is this belief based on data, or just on what I remember most easily? Second, consider alternatives. If something seems overwhelmingly true, ask yourself, what examples am I not seeing? Sometimes the quiet truths are the ones that don't make headlines. And finally, be aware of emotional amplification. If a story makes you feel strongly, fear, outrage, shame, it's more likely to stick. But emotional resonance isn't the same as factual relevance. Take a moment. Think about something you believe to be true, about the world, about people, about yourself. Now ask, is this based on deep knowledge, or on something I saw once that never left me? Memory is a powerful tool, but it's also selective. It stores what matters most to your brain, not what matters most in reality. This doesn't make you irrational, it makes you human. But part of being human is learning to work with your own mind, understanding when it's helping you, and when it's quietly misleading you. As we leave the availability heuristic behind, consider this. What if your deepest beliefs, your fears, your certainties, are not grounded in truth, but simply in what your mind remembers best? And if that's the case, what else might you be wrong about? Have you ever learned a new word? Maybe something obscure like sonder or apophenia, and then within hours or days you start hearing it everywhere, on podcasts, in articles, in conversations. It's as if the word has suddenly followed you out into the world, echoing back again and again. Or maybe you notice a particular car model on the street, one you've never really paid attention to before. Now it seems like every third vehicle is that exact car, in that exact color, passing by as if in a quiet conspiracy. What's happening here? It's not coincidence, and it's not magic. It's something called the Baader-Meinhof Illusion, also known as frequency illusion, a subtle, powerful trick of the mind that makes the familiar seem suddenly omnipresent. Here's how it works. The moment you encounter something new, an idea, a phrase, a symbol, your brain becomes tuned to it, not in a conscious way, more like a whisper beneath your awareness. From that point forward, your attention, without your permission, begins scanning for it, not because the thing is more common now, but because you have become more sensitive to it. It's a bit like adjusting the contrast on a photo. The object was always there, you just couldn't see it before. This illusion is the product of two mental forces working together. The first is selective attention. Once something enters your awareness, your brain starts filtering the world with that in mind. It notices related stimuli and pulls them forward, like highlights in a text. The second is confirmation bias. When you do see the thing again, you take it as evidence that it must be everywhere, confirming the very idea that it's suddenly more frequent, even if the actual frequency hasn't changed at all. So the illusion isn't that the thing is more present. The illusion is that you're only just noticing it, and mistaking that newfound awareness for a spike in frequency. It's a hauntingly elegant mistake, and it speaks volumes about how our minds construct reality, because we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as it becomes relevant to us, as we decide what matters, what stands out, what deserves focus, and the rest fades into the static of ordinary life. But here's where it gets even more interesting. This illusion doesn't just apply to words or cars, it applies to ideas, beliefs, fears, even people. Let's say you've recently become fascinated or obsessed with the idea that the world is secretly falling apart. You begin seeing signs everywhere, news headlines, economic data, social media posts, a friend's offhand comment. To you it all points in one direction, but has the world actually changed, or has your lens shifted? The Baader-Meinhof effect doesn't create truth. It distorts your perception of how often something appears, and that distorted perception becomes part of your worldview. We like to think that we form beliefs based on repeated exposure to information, but often, it's the belief itself that causes the exposure to feel repeated. You believe it, you notice it, you believe it more. A self-reinforcing loop. And in an age of algorithmic feeds and targeted ads, this illusion gets weaponized. Your curiosity is tracked, your interests are echoed, your searches are rewarded with more of the same. Soon the internet itself begins to feel like it's conspiring to confirm your suspicions. In truth, it's simply mirroring you. You see the pattern, you believe in the pattern. The pattern, now fed by your attention, grows stronger in your mind. But it was always just a pattern of noticing. Take a moment. Think about something that's been showing up in your life lately. A symbol, a name, a theme. Does it feel significant, mysterious, destined? Now ask, has this thing become more real, or has my awareness become more selective? This isn't meant to disillusion you, but to empower you. Because the Baader-Meinhof illusion reminds us, reality is not just what happens, it's also what we notice. And sometimes what we notice is determined not by the world, but by what we've been primed to see. This is why mindfulness matters. It's why skepticism, gentle, curious skepticism, is a tool, not a threat. To question what you see is not to distrust reality, it's to clarify it. Because you are not a passive observer of life, You are a participant in shaping what appears. Every act of focus is an act of creation. So next time something seems to follow you, an image, a name, a theme, pause, consider, observe not just the thing, but your noticing of the thing. That space between the world and your awareness, that's where your mind is playing its quiet games. Imagine this. A doctor gives you two options. Option A, a surgery has a 90% survival rate. Option B, the same surgery has a 10% death rate. The numbers are identical, but your decision won't be. Because the way a choice is framed, even when the facts remain unchanged, can dramatically alter how you feel, what you fear, and ultimately what you do. This is the framing effect, a psychological trick so subtle, so effective, that most of the time, you won't even realize it's happening. It begins with a simple idea. Humans are not purely rational beings. We like to think we weigh the facts, analyze the data, and make logical decisions. But in truth, we are emotional creatures. We respond to tone, context, and story. And when information is presented in a certain way, even with complete accuracy, our perception of it shifts. Advertisers, politicians, lawyers, and news organizations have long known this. Not by chance, but by design. A product isn't labeled 90% fat-free because that's clearer. It's labeled that way because it feels healthier than 10% fat. A politician doesn't say a policy hurts 10,000 families. They say it creates 40,000 jobs. A news story doesn't say 1 in 100 people were harmed. It says 99% were safe. Each version is technically true, but they provoke different reactions. And that's the essence of the frame, not what's inside the picture, but how the picture is presented. Framing can nudge you without your consent, without force, without lies, just by shifting emphasis, highlighting one truth while gently obscuring another. Consider a simple example from behavioral economics. Two groups of people are asked to choose between two treatments for a deadly disease. One treatment is said to save 200 out of 600 people. The other has a 1/3 chance of saving all 600, but a 2/3 chance that everyone will die. Most people choose the first option. It's safer, more predictable. But when the same choice is framed differently, when participants are told the first option means 400 people will die, rather than 200 will live, suddenly, preferences shift. People become more willing to gamble on the second, riskier option. The facts haven't changed, but the frame has. And this is more than semantics. It's persuasion at the deepest level. Frames don't just shape perception, they shape memory. Research shows that people remember information differently, depending on how it was initially framed. Your brain encodes not only what something is, but how it felt when you first heard it. Think about that for a moment. Your memories, your convictions may be the result of how someone presented a truth to you, not the truth itself. And the implications, they're vast. In criminal trials, the way evidence is presented can sway a jury. In public policy, the way problems are described can determine how people vote. In daily life, the way someone tells a story, what they emphasize, what they omit, can alter your opinion of a person, an event, even yourself. We're constantly being framed, not overtly, not maliciously, but persistently, quietly, and often, with our permission. Because the framing effect isn't just external, it happens internally too. You frame your own experiences. When you fail at something, do you say I'm not good enough? Or this was a chance to learn? When someone criticizes you, do you say they hate me, or they're challenging me to grow? Each frame tells a different story. Each story becomes your reality. And sometimes, the most painful events in our lives are shaped not by what happened, but by how we chose to frame them. You lost a job. One frame says, I've failed. Another says, I've been freed to find something better. Both may be true, but which frame do you live inside? The power of reframing is that it doesn't deny reality, it reorganizes it. Like turning a kaleidoscope, the pieces remain the same, but the picture transforms. Of course, this power can be used for good, or for manipulation. Propaganda thrives on framing. So does misinformation. And when combined with cognitive dissonance, we may accept these frames not because they're accurate, but because they make us feel right. So what can you do? You start by paying attention. When you hear a statistic, a story, a claim, ask yourself, how is this being framed? What's being emphasized? What's being left out? What would the same message look like from another angle? And then turn inward. Listen to the stories you tell yourself. Are they rooted in shame, fear, scarcity, Or are they open, curious, compassionate? You can't always choose what happens to you, but you can learn to choose the frame. Take a breath. Reflect on something difficult in your life. Now gently ask, is there another way to see this? Not to escape it, but to understand it differently. Because sometimes, the mind doesn't need a new truth. It just needs a new perspective. It's 1961. You walk into a quiet building on the campus of Yale University. You've answered a newspaper ad looking for volunteers to participate in a study about learning and memory. Seems harmless enough. A man in a lab coat greets you, polite, professional. He introduces another man, the learner. You shake hands, then you're told that you'll play the role of the teacher. Your task is to read word pairs aloud. If the learner gets an answer wrong, you'll deliver a small electric shock. You're led into another room. The learner is strapped into a chair, wires attached to his arms. You watch as it happens. He seems nervous. The researcher assures you the shocks won't cause permanent harm. You sit down. Before you is a shock generator. 30 switches, labeled from 15 volts all the way up to 450. The labels start with slight shock and end with danger, severe shock, and finally just ominous red X. You begin the test. The learner makes a mistake. You press the switch. 15 volts. He grunts. Another mistake. 30 volts. More sounds. As you continue, the learner cries out in pain, bangs on the wall, pleads to be released, says he has a heart condition. Eventually he goes silent. You hesitate. You turn to the man in the lab coat. He calmly says, the experiment requires that you continue. If you resist, he repeats, it is absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice. Now pause for a moment. What would you do? Would you stop, refuse, walk out? Most people believe they would. But in Stanley Milgram's now infamous experiment, 65% of participants continued to administer shocks all the way to the maximum, 450 volts, even after the learner had stopped responding, even after it sounded like he might be seriously harmed or worse. They weren't sadists, they were ordinary people, teachers, accountants, factory workers, salesmen, just like you, just like me. And the shocking part, there were no real shocks. The learner was an actor. The screams were pre-recorded, the deception was part of the study, but the reactions of the participants, their hesitation, their sweating, their shaking hands, their pained expressions were all real. Why did they keep going? Because an authority figure told them to. Milgram wanted to understand how atrocities, like those committed during the Holocaust, could happen, how people could participate in systems of cruelty and claim afterward, I was just following orders. The answer he found was chilling in its simplicity. When placed in a structured environment, with a figure of perceived authority, people will often surrender their judgment, their empathy, even their morality, not out of evil, but out of obedience. And not blindly. Many participants protested. They expressed discomfort. Some begged to stop, but they still continued. Because the authority didn't threaten them, he merely insisted, quietly, firmly, repeatedly. It turns out, obedience isn't just about fear. Sometimes, it's about trust. We assume the person in charge knows better, has more information, that if something were truly wrong, they'd stop us, but that assumption can be deadly. This phenomenon isn't confined to experiments, it plays out in real life all the time. In military hierarchies, in corporations, in cults, in governments, ordinary people doing extraordinary harm, because someone told them it was necessary, legal, expected. Even in daily life, the echoes of Milgram's findings show up. We follow workplace rules we know are unethical. We participate in social dynamics that exclude, exploit, or humiliate others, because that's just how the system works. We let injustice pass, thinking someone else will speak up, someone more qualified, someone above us. The Milgram experiment isn't about a handful of misguided participants, it's about all of us. It reveals the uncomfortable truth that morality is often fragile, easily overridden when dressed in the uniform of authority. But here's the deeper, quieter truth. The experiment didn't show that people are evil, it showed that people are deeply social, programmed to cooperate, conditioned to defer to leadership. We are creatures of order, sometimes to a fault. So what do we do with this knowledge? We learn to pause, to question. We learn to ask, does this align with my values? We learn to recognize the subtle pressure to comply, not as evidence of what's right, but as something that must be examined. Obedience isn't always wrong, but unquestioned obedience, that's where the danger lives. Take a breath. Reflect. When was the last time you did something, not because you wanted to, but because someone told you to? Did it feel right? Did you pause to consider the cost? You don't need to answer now. Just let the question settle in, because the most powerful resistance to unethical authority isn't defiance, it's awareness. You consider yourself a good person. Honest, kind, rational. But then, something happens. You lie to a friend, you eat something you swore you'd give up. You continue working for a company whose values you privately disagree with. A tension arises, subtle but persistent, like a faint ringing in the back of your mind. It says, this doesn't add up. That tension has a name: cognitive dissonance. The discomfort we feel when our actions, beliefs, or values don't align, when we contradict ourselves, not outwardly, but inwardly. Our minds begin to scramble for resolution. This isn't just emotional, it's neurological. Brain scans show a spike in activity when we experience dissonance, especially in regions tied to emotional regulation and decision-making. Your brain is trying to solve a problem, and it doesn't like waiting. So what do? We often change the story rather than the behavior. Instead of quitting the job, we say, well, every company has issues. Instead of admitting the lie, we say, it was for their own good. Instead of owning the contradiction, we rewrite the narrative until it feels smooth again. Leon Festinger, the psychologist who coined the term in the 1950s, conducted a now famous experiment. Participants performed a boring task, repetitive, tedious, mind-numbing. Then they were asked to tell the next person that the task was fun. Some were paid a small amount to lie, others, a larger sum. Here's the twist. Those paid only $1 to lie were more likely to later say they genuinely enjoyed the task. Why? Because the lie created dissonance. I just told someone this was fun, but it wasn't, and I did it for almost nothing. That felt wrong. So their brains unconsciously adjusted their beliefs to match their behavior. Maybe it wasn't so bad after all. In contrast, those paid a larger amount had a clear justification. I did it for the money, no conflict, no need to adjust their thinking. This is how dissonance works. It's not the contradiction that hurts most, it's the inability to justify it. And it's everywhere. Smokers know cigarettes are harmful, but many convince themselves they're not that bad, or that they need them to think clearly. It's not because they're ignorant, it's because admitting the full truth would mean changing, and change is hard. We also see this in relationships. Someone stays with a partner who mistreats them, not because they don't see the red flags, but because leaving would mean admitting they made a mistake. So instead, they rationalize. They're just going through a phase, or, it's my fault too. The lie isn't always external. Sometimes, it's the story you tell yourself to avoid pain. This is the dark elegance of cognitive dissonance. It protects your identity even at the cost of your reality. And yet, there's something hopeful in it. That inattention, that discomfort, it's a signal, a sign that something inside you wants to be aligned, wants to be truthful, wants to heal. Think of it like a compass, spinning wildly when you're off course. Painful, yes, but useful, if you choose to listen. So how do you break the cycle? Start by noticing when something feels off. Pay attention to the little justifications. The moment you say, well, it's complicated. Pause. Is it, or are you smoothing over a contradiction? Next, be willing to sit with discomfort. Dissonance often leads to growth, not by eliminating the tension, but by exploring it. Ask yourself, which belief do I want to protect right now? Which one am I afraid to lose? And most importantly, don't rush to resolve the conflict. Let it stay unsettled. Let the questions linger. Sometimes, the realignment comes not in a single decision, but slowly, as your mind catches up with your heart. Take a moment now. Think of a choice you made recently that didn't sit right. What story did you tell yourself afterward? Was it true, or just comforting? No need to judge, no need to fix, just notice, because noticing is the first step toward integrity. And here's the deeper truth. Cognitive dissonance isn't a flaw, it's a feature, a sign that you care about being honest, coherent, aligned. Without it, you'd feel nothing while contradicting your deepest values. That ache you feel, that tension, is proof that something inside you still wants to be whole. Now, as we leave the battlefield of the mind, let's step into the next illusion, because sometimes, what feels like your choice isn't your choice at all. Sometimes, you follow instructions simply because they come from authority, even if those instructions go against everything you believe. There's a part of you that you don't show the world. You keep it buried, tucked away behind smiles, routines, and carefully curated identities. You pretend it isn't there. Maybe you've even forgotten it exists. But late at night, when everything is quiet, and there's nothing left to distract you, it stirs. This is your shadow self. Not a ghost, not a monster, but something closer, something far more intimate. A reflection of everything you deny about yourself. Your fears, your rage, your envy, your shame. All the impulses you've been taught to hide, but never stopped feeling. The concept comes from the work of Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung, who believed that the psyche isn't just the conscious mind, it's also made of the unconscious, the unseen, and within that unconscious lies the shadow, the collection of thoughts, emotions, and instincts we've rejected or suppressed, often since childhood. You were told not to cry, so you learned to hide your sadness. You were told anger is ugly, so you swallowed your rage. You were told to be good, so you buried your desire to rebel. But those parts didn't disappear. They simply moved deeper. The shadow is formed not because you're broken, but because you were conditioned to be accepted, to be loved, to be safe. We push certain traits out of our conscious awareness, thinking we're becoming better people, more polite, more kind, more in control. But what we often become is fragmented, and the more you reject your shadow, the more power it gains. It shows up in your projections, those moments when you judge someone harshly for a trait you secretly fear in yourself. It leaks through your sarcasm, your passive aggression, your inexplicable anxiety. It shows up in your dreams, in the people you irrationally hate, and sometimes in the mirror. You might think, that's not me, I would never do that. But the shadow whispers, are you sure? We see it in those sudden emotional outbursts that seem to come from nowhere. We say, I don't know what came over me, but we do. It was the shadow, rising up for just a moment, demanding to be seen. And here's where it gets darker. The more virtuous you try to be, the more dangerous your shadow can become, because righteousness without reflection breeds repression, and repression, when it finally breaks, can destroy relationships, careers, even lives. Think of public figures who preached morality, only to be exposed for living double lives, or the person who's always calm, always agreeable, until one day they explode, seemingly without warning. That eruption wasn't spontaneous, it was a pressure valve breaking after years of silence. But the shadow isn't just negative, it holds potential, creativity, power, vitality. In every angry thought, there may be a boundary waiting to be asserted. In every forbidden desire, there might be a suppressed dream. In every jealous impulse, a hidden value craving to be recognized. Jung didn't believe the shadow should be destroyed. He believed it should be integrated, acknowledged, accepted, even befriended, not to indulge it, but to understand it, to become whole. This process is called shadow work, and it begins not with judgment, but with curiosity. When something triggers you, ask, what part of me is this touching? Why does this bother me so deeply? When you feel a strong emotional reaction, disgust, shame, outrage, pause. Don't push it down, don't justify it away. Trace it, follow it inward. Ask yourself, what have I disowned that might be asking to return? It's not an easy path. It takes courage to face what you've hidden, to peel away the layers of conditioning, and look honestly at what lies beneath. But in doing so, you free yourself. You stop being controlled by what you refuse to see. You become less reactive, more grounded, less afraid of the dark, because you've already walked through it. And perhaps most importantly, you become more compassionate, because once you've met your own shadow, it becomes harder to judge someone else's. You recognize their struggles, not as alien, but as familiar. We all wear masks, we all carry secrets, but we don't have to let them rot in the basement of the mind. So take a moment now to sit with this. Is there a part of you you've been avoiding? An emotion you've labeled as bad, ugly, or wrong? What would happen if, just for a moment, you let it speak? No need to answer out loud. Just let the question settle, like ink in water, because when we silence the shadow, it grows louder. But when we listen, it begins to soften, to transform, to rejoin us. Try to recall your very first memory. What do you see? A room? A face? A moment of falling? Laughter? Fear? It feels so vivid, like a preserved snapshot of your past. But what if I told you that memory might never have happened? Not exactly like that, maybe not at all. This is the unsettling realm of false memories, where the mind, with total confidence, recalls things that never took place. Not distorted memories, not fuzzy details, entire events, sometimes deeply emotional, that are entirely fabricated. The phenomenon isn't just theoretical. It's been studied, documented, and replicated in experiments. One of the most well-known comes from cognitive psychologist Elizabeth Loftus, who has spent decades exploring just how malleable memory can be. In one study, researchers told participants several stories from their childhood, some true, some invented. One of the fake stories involved getting lost in a shopping mall as a child. To the researchers' surprise, a significant number of participants not only accepted the false story, but added details. They described what the mall looked like, the panic they felt, even the stranger who helped them find their way back. None of it happened, but to the participants, it might as well have. Their brains had accepted the story and made it real. This happens because memory isn't like a video recording. It's more like a storybook that gets rewritten every time you open it. Each time you recall something, you reconstruct the memory, and in doing so, you're vulnerable to suggestion, bias, emotion, and even imagination. The more often you revisit a memory, the more likely it is to change, and over time, these changes can become indistinguishable from the original, especially when others support or reinforce the false version. Imagine a family member saying, "Remember when you knocked over that vase at Grandma's and blamed the dog?" Maybe you don't, at first, but then the image begins to take shape. You can picture the room, the vase, the sound of it hitting the floor. You laugh. "Oh yeah, I remember that," you say. Except, it wasn't you, it was your sibling, or it didn't happen at all, but now it feels real, anchored in your identity. False memories aren't just about childhood antics. They can have serious consequences. Eyewitness testimonies in criminal cases, for instance, have been proven unreliable. People misidentify suspects, recall details that never occurred, or even come to believe they saw something based on how a question was worded. A question as simple as "Did you see the gun?" rather than "Did you see a gun?" can plant a suggestion. The brain fills in the blanks with what it expects to be true, and that's the truly unsettling part. False memories don't feel any different than real ones. There's no internal alarm bell that says, "This didn't happen." They carry the same emotional weight, the same visual clarity. In some cases, they feel more vivid than true memories because they were crafted more recently, more intentionally. Think of the implication. If your memories shape your identity, who you are, what you've survived, what you've learned, then what does it mean if some of those memories are fiction? Who are you without your past? If your past is a story you only think you remember, it's a quiet kind of horror, isn't it? The idea that the foundation of the self, your personal timeline, may be riddled with cracks, gaps, inventions, and yet, there's something strangely human about this imperfection. Perhaps we need these fictions, perhaps the mind weaves them in as emotional survival, to make a painful memory more bearable, to give us a sense of continuity, to fill in the silence where nothing was recorded. It's not necessarily deception, it's adaptation. Still, it's worth asking, what do I know happened in my life, and what do I just believe happened? Have you ever sworn that something happened one way, only to be shown undeniable evidence that it didn't? A photo, a video, a journal entry, and yet, your mind insists, "No, that's not how I remember it." That discomfort you feel in that moment, that quiet, internal stutter, is your brain defending its version of the truth. Because even when it's wrong, it still believes, and we all do it, collectively. There's even a name for when large groups of people remember something incorrectly, the Mandela Effect, named after many people's shared false memory that Nelson Mandela died in prison in the 1980s. Despite living until 2013, people remember watching the funeral on TV. They remember news coverage. Some even claim vivid emotional responses to it. But it never happened, at least, not in this version of reality. So take a breath, let this idea sink in slowly. The mind is not a vault, it's a garden, alive, changing, vulnerable to the seeds of suggestion. And in knowing this, you gain something important: awareness. You become more careful with your assumptions, more gentle with others, more curious about your own story. Take a moment to reflect. Which of your memories feel emotionally strong, but maybe factually fragile? What have you clung to that may not be as certain as it seemed? Not to erase the past, but to understand it better. You believe you're a rational person. Logical. Open-minded. You gather facts, weigh the evidence, and come to sound conclusions. At least, that's what it feels like. But what if your brain isn't searching for the truth? Just proof that you were right all along. This is the confirmation trap. A quiet, insidious psychological trick that doesn't shout, it whispers, gently nudging you toward information that flatters your existing beliefs, while filtering out anything that challenges them. It's not malicious. It's protective. Your mind wants coherence, comfort, a consistent narrative about who you are and how the world works. And so, it favors information that fits, even if that means ignoring better evidence, clearer logic, uncomfortable truth. Let's say you believe that people are fundamentally selfish. You notice every rude driver, every cutting remark, every act of indifference. But when someone holds a door open or goes out of their way to help a stranger, it doesn't register. It doesn't fit the story. Your attention filters it out like static. Over time, this filter deepens. You might start reading only articles that agree with your view, following people who think the way you do. Even your memories begin to shift, subtly rewriting themselves to make you feel more consistent. The trap is effective because it feels like thinking, but it's really a defense mechanism. The truth is often complex, contradictory, or ambiguous. Confirmation bias simplifies it. It tells you, you were right, you've always been right. And we don't just do this with opinions, we do it with people. If you believe someone dislikes you, every neutral look becomes a glare, every silence becomes rejection. But if you adore someone, you'll overlook warning signs that might be obvious to anyone else. We're not seeing people as they are, we're seeing them through the stories we've already written about them. One of the most unsettling experiments demonstrating this bias came from Stanford in the 1970s. Two groups of participants were given data about the death penalty. Half were in favor, half opposed. But here's the twist. All the participants were shown the same data, some of it supporting capital punishment, some against. And what happened? Each group walked away more entrenched in their original belief. They focused on the data that confirmed their stance and dismissed the rest as flawed or biased. The exact same evidence pushed people further apart. This is the dark magic of the confirmation trap. It doesn't just affect individuals, it polarizes entire societies. And in the age of algorithms where social media platforms serve us what we're likely to agree with, the trap has become a prison of comfort. Each click tightens the bars. Even science, our most rigorous method for truth-seeking, is not immune. Researchers are more likely to publish findings that support their hypotheses than those that contradict them. Peer reviewers, too, favor what aligns with prevailing theories. It takes discipline to see past our mental patterns, even when trained to do so. But maybe the most dangerous part of confirmation bias isn't what it filters in, but what it keeps out. It robs us of the chance to grow, to shift, to change. Because real growth doesn't come from echo chambers, it comes from discomfort. Think of a time when you changed your mind about something important. Did it feel good, or did it feel like your brain had to tear itself open and rebuild? Most of us avoid that process unless we absolutely have to, and so the trap persists. Quiet, comfortable, deadly to progress. But here's the secret. You can't eliminate confirmation bias entirely. No one can. But you can notice it, question it. You can practice mental humility, the ability to admit you might be wrong, even about things you care deeply about. You can choose to seek out opposing views, not to argue but to understand, to test your ideas like a scientist, instead of defending them like a lawyer. It's not easy, it's not natural, but it's powerful. And when you catch yourself in the act, favoring the article that agrees with you, dismissing a friend's point too quickly, glossing over inconvenient facts, you don't have to punish yourself. Just pause, notice, reflect. Take a moment now. Ask yourself, what's a belief I hold tightly, too tightly? When's the last time I seriously challenged it? Am I seeking truth, or just seeking to be right? You don't need to answer now. Let the questions linger, like smoke in a still room. Because sometimes the most honest thing you can do is admit you don't know. And now that we've opened the door to self-deception, let's go one step deeper, because it's not just your opinions that are edited, it's your memories. You're standing at a crosswalk, pressing the button to trigger the signal. You press it again and again. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you believe it'll change faster if you keep pressing. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But it feels like it will. And that feeling is all it takes. This small act, so automatic, so seemingly harmless, reveals one of the most quietly unsettling aspects of the human mind. We crave control, even the illusion of it. Especially the illusion of it. Psychologists call this the illusion of control, the tendency to overestimate our ability to influence outcomes that are in truth random or beyond our power. We believe we can control more than we actually can, and often we don't realize we're doing it. This isn't just about elevators or crosswalks, it's in the dice player who throws harder for high numbers, the gambler who swears by lucky socks, the manager who believes their leadership single-handedly turned the quarter around. In each case, we mistake correlation for causation, agency for coincidence, and we feel good doing it. In 1975, psychologist Ellen Langer conducted a now famous experiment. Participants were asked to buy lottery tickets. Some were randomly assigned a ticket by the researcher. Others got to choose their own. When asked how much they'd sell their tickets for, those who had chosen their own ticket demanded 5 times more money than those who were handed one. The odds were the same, the outcome was pure chance. But choice gave them a false sense of ownership and power. So why does the brain do this? From an evolutionary perspective, control meant survival. If our ancestors could predict and manipulate their environment, weather patterns, animal behavior, even tribal alliances, they were more likely to live another day. The illusion of control, then, might have acted like a mental placebo. It reduced stress, increased confidence, and helped people act decisively even in uncertain situations. But in the modern world, this instinct can become dangerous. Think of someone who believes they can control their health through sheer willpower, ignoring medical advice in favor of mind over matter, or someone clinging to a toxic relationship, convinced they can change the other person if they just try harder. The illusion becomes a trap, comforting, but deeply misleading. Even in organizations, leaders often believe their decisions control outcomes far more than they do. In reality, markets shift, people change, variables multiply, but no one wants to admit how much of success is timing, luck, chaos. It's uncomfortable to accept that, sometimes, we're not steering the ship, we're riding the tide. There's also a darker side to this illusion. It's not just about overestimating your control. It can lead to blaming others when they clearly had none. People assume the homeless are homeless because they didn't try hard enough, or that someone who got sick just didn't take care of themselves. It's easier to believe that bad things only happen to people who deserve them than to accept that randomness and tragedy strike without reason. The illusion of control isn't just personal, it's societal. We build systems, institutions, even ideologies around it. Self-help books promise transformation, if you just visualize. Politicians claim they alone can fix what's broken. Economists model complex systems and pretend they're manageable. We need to believe the world is controllable, that we're not just atoms drifting in a storm of probability. But once you see the illusion for what it is, it changes things. You start to notice how many of your choices are just habits wrapped in hope, how often you cling to rituals just to feel grounded. You might feel a sense of vertigo at first, like looking down from a great height and realizing there's no railing. But here's the twist, recognizing the illusion doesn't make you powerless, it makes you aware. When you know where control ends and chance begins, you can focus your energy on what truly matters, your intentions, your responses, your ethics. You stop wasting effort trying to bend the world to your will, and instead learn to move with it. Like a dancer who doesn't control the music, but learns to flow with it, beautifully, purposefully. So take a moment to reflect. What parts of your life feel like they're in your control, but maybe aren't? And which parts are in your control, but you've neglected, because they're uncomfortable, uncertain, or quiet? Let that sit with you, gently. You don't need to answer right away, just feel it. And now, let's move forward, because this illusion isn't the only mental trick reshaping your reality. There's another, a quiet whisper in your mind that reinforces everything you already believe, whether it's true or not.